the next part, what we will do is that no, we will close this here. We will get into the next one, but because we do not have that much time, what we will do is that I am not going to discuss some of the technical part of the discussion. Basically, I said that initially that we will show how the gravity model can be derived from a trade model, right. So, let us not get into that, instead we will get into some of the applications of the gravity model using Indian data for the in the case of Indian export and some issues related to trade in general for India. So, we will directly go into that. I am all skipping all this. So, before that those who are interested in getting some data about value added trade in value added, you can look at these classification, these data sources. There is a data source called TIVA, trade in value added database. This is maintained by the OECD, and this has data for a number of countries including for India, right. India is included there. So, you can get all this DVA divided by export ratio for different sectors, overall agriculture, service and many sectors. But the only difference here compared to what I estimated and I presented here is that in our case we have this data for 112 sectors. What is available there is for some 35 sectors. So, it is much more aggregated than what is available in our estimates, which you can get if you want to get the estimates that I have done. You can download it from a working paper which is available in IGIDR website. I have given the reference which you can use it for downloading. There is also an Exim Bank occasional paper, you can download this data from there. So, then there is a world input output database which is available, that is available for 2014 for 43 countries including India, and but that is again aggregated sector classification, not 112, it is again some 35 sectors. Okay. And but the advantage there is that this is available for many countries. In my estimate, it is only for India, but for more number of sectors. Okay. Now, we get into this gravity equation. I am skipping all these because these are little bit technical topic which is not necessary now. If we get time, we will come back to this. Okay. Let us get into some empirical issue and then see where gravity model can be applied and how it can be interpreted for analyzing some of the trade related issues. Now, this is some general background about India's trade performance during last several years. So, what we have here is the data on export performance for merchandise and commercial services. You get this data from for trade related data, those who are not familiar with that, you can get the trade related detailed data for the world for different countries from a statistical software called WITS, World Integrated Trade Solution. World Integrated Trade Solution. This is a free software which you can download. You need not download, it is now available in the website. You register using your email ID, then you can download certain data from there for number of countries trade related, but remember that data that is available there is gross trade, it is not a trade in value added. As I said earlier, when you use gross trade data, it has certain limitations, right, for answering certain question, but still the data is useful for analyzing several other things. The only thing is that you need to know what are the limitations, and knowing that limitation you can use it for analyzing several things. So, it is not that the usual trade data is useless, it is useful for a number of purposes. So, what here we are showing is that what has been the growth rate, the average annual growth rate of export and for India, and compare that with the world, right, during different time period. So, if you take a long time period, this is the post liberalization year 1993 to 2018, India's export, merchandise export grew at 13.2%, which is higher than the world growth rate of world export, which was 7.2%, and services export it is even greater, 18.2%, and world it was 8.2%. Now, you can break that into several sub periods, and you see generally during these various sub periods, Indian exports generally grew faster than the world exports, but these things have changed, like even though the overall export growth is very decent, 13% is not very bad, but if you look at more recent years, that is 2012 onwards, growth has become negative, right. 2012-17 growth has become negative, 12-18 is there is not much growth happening in the export side, right. So, whatever that growth that happened during the initial periods, initial first 2 decades, particularly the second decade of economic reforms, is now come to a kind of lower performance now. So, now that raises question about what can be done to improve export growth, what are the policy challenges, etc. Now, this is another graph which shows the world exports in goods, which is this big bars is the world export in goods, and then Indian export in goods, this is the Indian export here, yeah, as a percentage of GDP, not in absolute terms. So, as a percentage of world GDP, what is world export? That is the bar, right, the red bar, and as a percentage of Indian GDP, what is the export? That is this one. So, which means that if you look at it like Indian export can go further, right, as a percentage of GDP. If you take the world as an average, there is a possibility, even though it has increased, it has declined in more recent years. There is Indian export as a percent of Indian GDP has declined in more recent years, and here the same thing is also shown for services. So, in the case of services, we see that Indian graph is above the world. That means the argument that India is relatively more service driven economy, right, because Indian service export as a proportion of India's GDP is higher than the world service export as a proportion of world GDP, right, that you can see there in that graph. Now, this is the world market share. What is the India's share in world market? India's export share in world market in merchandise and services, as well as for China for comparison. So, if you look at merchandise, China's merchandise share is this one, right, which you can see a major steep increase, and it is very high. It is about 14% of world export. China accounts for 14% of world export, right, in merchandise, and India's share is much low. That is this line graph, this one is much low compared to China, and services, it is not that, the difference is not that huge, even though India is a major service exporting country, but still China is higher than India in terms of the total value of services export. You see that the bar graph, China is above that of India, right, throughout the period. So, this argument that India is a major service exporter again is not very correct when you, especially when you compare to service export. So, service export like for example, software services, financial services. So, like when you do or retail services, e-business, all these will come as part of the services. So, similarly, when people for India, it is mainly software, IT related, information technology related services. That is the main thing that comes there. Yeah. This is all gross. These are all gross. Not value added. Value added, we stopped there. We ended that discussion. Now we are moving to the old database. Okay. So, this is a balance of payment indicator for India, right. The balance of payment, if you want to look at India's balance of payment situation, what are the key indicators that you should look at. So, these are all percent of GDP. Why percent of GDP? Because absolute values, you know that everything increases all the time, right. That does not give you any kind of idea about the health of the economy, right, about how the situation is changing in balance of payment. So, you have to always kind of standardize or normalize that with some appropriate unit. So, here GDP is an appropriate unit because that reflects the whole economy. So, we calculate the percent of GDP and we give 3 indicators. One is the net invisibles, the overall trade balance and the current account deficit. So, in the balance of payment you have a merchandise account and then you have a invisible account and then you have a current account deficit and then there you have a capital account, right. So, overall the balance of payment, it should be in balance, right. There should not be any deficit or surplus in the end, right, because if there is a deficit in the current account, there should be a surplus in the capital account. So, the two should match and then there is no deficit or surplus in the end, the two sides should match. Now, here we are not talking about the capital account, we are not looking at the capital account, we are looking only at the current account. In the current account there are 2 divisions, one is the merchandise, the other one is the invisibles. Invisible is the services mainly. So, in the case of this graph is the one which is the bar graph which is below, which are all negative, that is the trade deficit in the goods account, in the merchandise account. So, India is running a trade deficit in the merchandise account, that means Indian exports are lower than Indian imports, the import values are lower than export values throughout that period and it is always negative, whereas this one is the invisibles where exports are higher than imports. So, that is giving a cushion against the current account deficit. Current account deficit is the this line is the current account deficit, that is basically the overall balance in the current account. So, you on the trade account, on the merchandise you have a deficit, on service you have a surplus, but still overall you have a deficit, right, overall you have a deficit. And now that deficit is met in the capital account, because on the capital account we have net inflows, the capital inflows are coming, the inflows are higher than the outflows. So, that you are able to meet that deficit and at the same time the country is able to accumulate some foreign exchange reserves, right. So, that is what is happening overall in the balance of payment, but then it is clear here in the merchandise account the deficit is becoming a problem in the merchandise account, because there is a increasing deficit and in the more recent years we have seen the export growth has become negative. So, in this context the question is what should be done to promote exports, because now the government, in the previous discussion we have shown that exports can be an important instrument for job creation through linkages, etc. Now, if it can be an important instrument for job creation, promotion of exports should become a national priority as part of the Make in India program, etc. But then we need to know what need to be done so that export can grow, right. That is the important policy question. Now, in order to answer this question, the important thing to note is that what drives export growth, we should ask that question. What really drives export growth? What are the underlying sources of export growth? Then only the policy makers can target or kind of take initiatives, policy initiatives, so that the correct policy changes can be made, which would lead to faster export growth. So, this is the question, what type of policy interventions would help achieve India to get a higher growth, higher export growth. So, to understand this question, we need to keep in mind that there are, for any country in the world, there are 2 sources of export growth. Export growth can come from fundamentally from 2 major sources. one is what is called intensive margin, the other one is extensive margin. What does that mean? Intensive margin basically means that when you do more of the same thing again and again, that is intensive margin. When you diversify, it is extensive margin. When a country exports new products and it exports to new markets, it is a extensive margin. You are growing at the extensive margin. That means you are introducing new products and exporting new products, and you are catering to new markets which you are not doing earlier. That is one way of growing, correct? Enter into new market or start exporting new products. So, that is one way of growing, getting export growth. So, that is what is called extensive margin. The other one is intensive margin. Intensive margin is you are basically doing the same thing that you were doing earlier, the same market, same product, but you are doing in larger volume. The scale is high, right? So, that is intensive margin. So, these are two ways in which you can grow. Now, the question is which one should the government focus, the policy should focus. Ideally, you should focus on both, right? But then if you do not focus on both, on the other hand, you are focusing in the wrong channel, right? Suppose that it is a primarily intensive margin which is responsible for growth, but the policy is focusing on an extensive margin, then it is misguided, right? Or so we need to know what is actually driving export growth and what has actually driven India's export growth in the past, and countries like China, which became a successful exporter of the world in the world, which of the two margins actually drove their growth, which one is responsible for China's growth, and which one is responsible for India's growth. So, we want to do a comparative type of study here, comparing India with China along these two margins. So, intensive margin, as I said, it captures the depth of a country's export relationship. How deep is the export market? Is it a very fragile? That means you export very little of everything, that is intensive margin. You can get a very high extensive margin when you do very little of everything, right? That is, then your extensive margin can be very high, because you are diversified everywhere in all products, all markets, but you do very little. That means a very low intensive margin, but a very high extensive margin. Or you can have the other thing where you are not diversifying into many things, you are basically focusing on few things, but you are doing it in a major way there, you are a world leader there, that is intensive margin. Or you can do both, you are there everywhere and you are doing everything very big, and that is what China is doing. China is there everywhere and they are doing big everywhere. What India is doing, we are there everywhere, but we do very little. So, that is what basically we are going to show, right. So, we earlier used to say, no, the jack of all, master of nothing. That is what India is. Master of, no, jack of all. Yeah. So, China is the jack of all and also master of all. India is jack of all and master of nothing, right. So, that is the basically the issue which we wanted to look at using data, right. So, using appropriate method, whether we can actually decompose what is extensive margin, what is intensive margin for India and China, and which is responsible for their growth. So, once we know that, we can ask this question, should export promotion policies be targeted at accelerating export growth at the intensive margin or at the extensive margin, and what have been the relative roles of the two margins in India's export growth, what have been the relative importance, right. So, I will not give that job to another Asian, right. So, the futility of this entire argument is summarized very clearly by the cartoonist, but not many economists understand it, or many other policy makers understand this, right. So, within the US. So, what we are going to do today is that many of these arguments is not conceptually very sound, and there is no empirical basis for those arguments. Why we say that? We say that based on one important observation, because when we make any conclusion about what trade is doing or not doing, we use data for arriving at that conclusion, right. Because if you say that China is running huge trade deficit with the United States, and when Trump is saying that, he has to use some data to suggest that yes, there is a huge trade deficit, this many $1 billion of trade deficit is there for United States. Now, what is the data that he uses to say that? He uses this data, it's a standard data, it is a trade data. Trade data is collected by, how does the trade data come about? It comes from, it is a result of the administrative activity that the customs officials do at the port, right. When goods go out of a country or comes into the country, it has to be recorded, like this much value of particular goods are exported from India to some country. So, the final destination it will mention which is the good which is exported, it will mention what is the value of that good, all that is mentioned, right. That is the way trade data comes in all countries, that is how it comes. Now, there is a major problem with that data. What is the problem? The problem is because you think your mobile phone that you are holding, which country make this mobile phone? Most of the time when you get it is China, made in China, right. It is made in China. Not just a mobile phone, almost everything is China. That is what it is written when you buy this particular good. Now, if you look at clearly, how is it possible for one country to make almost everything? It is not actually possible. Now, what is going on? See, iPhone, if you are buying one iPhone, it may cost, say, let us say some $100. Now, $100 iPhone, when you pay to buy an iPhone, how much of that $100 is actually going to China? It is very, very small. It is only $3 that is going to China. The remaining $97 does not go to China, even though it is written made in China, right. There is data to show that. I will show the data, how much actually China is getting when it is actually making a good. It is getting a very small fraction of whatever is being made in China. It is not getting the end thing that is being made in China. Now, why that is happening? That is because of global value chain or global production networks or global value chain. You call it different names: fragmentation trade, vertical specialization, global value chains, global production networks, various names are there. So, what is happening is that there are in order to make a particular commodity, you need various parts, components, various intermediate goods, different types of services. So, goods are made in different stages, they are not done all together, right. So, when they are done in various stages and various components are involved, parts and components are involved, each country tend to specialize in particular stage of the production process. Why that is so? Because each country has a specific advantage. It has a advantage in producing certain things, right. A particular country cannot produce everything, because they are not good at producing everything which is involved in the production of a particular good. So, the forces of specialization operates. So, what each country does is that what it is good at doing, right. So, United States is good at doing research and development. Why it is good at doing research and development? Because it has excellent skilled labor, right. It has the best laboratories, it has skilled labor. They also get human capital from other countries, right, though because so the best engineers, best from different countries, they all go to United States. So, they attract them. So, they have the skilled labor, they have good laboratories, they have all the supporting environment. So, they do R&D, they do design, they do what we call the high value added segment of the production activities, the high value added segment. So, there they specialize. So, the design and the R&D, marketing, all these are the stages where value addition is the greatest, and that is where the rich countries specialize. And then they find that it makes sense for the companies to outsource certain other activities which is mostly labor intensive to countries like China, because their wages are low, workers are more. So, it makes sense to outsource those to them rather than employing the workers in United States, because if they employ workers in United States, they have to pay more wages. So, it is advantageous for those companies to do this in other countries. So, they outsource. That is why China specialize in assembly activities. So, they do assembly. So, when they specialize in assembly activities, these parts and components which they use in producing an iPhone, they come from various countries. It does not come only from United States, it comes also from Japan, it comes from Taiwan, Korea and many other countries are involved in the production of the final good. Now, it is not in the case of just iPhone or iPad or aircraft or electronic goods, it is there in most several goods. You cannot think about any good which is only made in only one country. There are very exceptions, except in agriculture products. Most of the manufactured products are produced in different countries. The production processes are happening in different countries. Now, Bangladesh is an exporter of garment, but Bangladesh does not have cotton. So, where do they get cotton? They get cotton from India and Pakistan. They import it and then they export produce garments, and then big multinational companies based in Europe and US, they subcontract to the manufacturers in Bangladesh to produce things according to their specifications, and then they brand it and then sell it in the world market. That is how. So, this is the value chain, right. Now, you will be surprised that you know Barbie doll, that that a girl, small little girls, they play with Barbie doll. So, if you look at how a Barbie doll is made, people have studied about it and they have found that there are 16 countries involved in making Barbie doll. The basic design happens in United States, the clothes are procured from Thailand, and the stitching happens in China, and its shoes comes from Sweden or Switzerland, its hair comes from some other European country. So, it is like all spread out, it is not happening in one country. So, this is what is the importance of global value chain. So, it is happening everywhere, not just in few commodities. Now, the problem with this is that if you collect trade data when this is happening, then what happens? So, when China is exporting iPad from US, from China to US or to any other countries, the Chinese customs officials will record the value of whatever good that is going. It will not record what is the domestic value addition. It is recording what is the total value of good that is going from China. The country which is importing is also recording the total value of the good that is coming to that country. Now, this is completely misleading, right, because the same thing is recorded multiple times in different countries when the same good is going one country to another country, then the third country. So, Japan is sending an intermediate good to Korea first. So, at that time Japan customs recording that transaction, the value of that transaction shows that this much of good has gone to Korea. Then Korea is giving some value addition to that particular intermediate good and sending it to Taiwan. Then again the same good is again recorded, the value of the same good is again recorded. It is not recording the value added, it is recording the entire value of what is going from one country. So, finally, it is going to China, again it is recorded, and then China is sending it to United States, it is again recorded. So, that means how many times it is recorded, the same thing is recorded, and we strictly avoid double counting when we measure value added. When we measure GDP of a country, it is measured on the basis of value added. We do not want to measure the same thing multiple times, right. That is basically the idea of how you correctly measure GDP, but this is not happening in trade data. Now, the reason why it is not happening is because it is a byproduct of an administrative activity that the customs doing, and they do not have the mandate to do that. So, yeah.
That way the final producer will always have the highest value.
That is exactly the point. So, then the country which is doing the assembly will always have the highest value of whatever is being reported, right. So, then what will happen is that the actual trade deficit with China is exaggerated, right, and almost every country will have trade deficit with China. Why? Because China is the assembly center. So, since it is an assembly, it is like a local shop buys things from various other people and then sell it with a margin on the goods that they buy. obviously when he sell it, what he sell will be at a higher price than what he buys, because otherwise he cannot operate, right, because that is the kind of business he is doing. So, his value of what he is selling will be always higher than the value of what he is buying. That is what China is doing. That means the trade deficit, most countries will run a trade deficit with China, and that is quite natural to expect, and it is not a big deal to kind of say that you are running so much a trade deficit with China, because that is what they do. They also import a lot. If you rank countries on the basis of which are the countries in the world which are the exporters, China will come top. China will also come top if you rank countries in terms of major importers in the world. It is not just export side, it is in both sides. So, so that is one problem. The other problem why these trade deficit figures are not actually correct is because United States is importing good from China, but this good actually came from a major part of that value addition would have come from Japan or South Korea or from Taiwan, but you are attributing that deficit to China. You are not attributing that deficit to those countries, right, because that is a destination from which it immediately came. The original source of the value added in that particular good is other country. So, in order to correctly estimate what is the trade deficit, you have to estimate this trade deficit on the basis of trade in value added, not in trade in gross terms, because if you measure it in terms of trade in gross terms, then you will not get the correct picture, because this double counting and multiple counting that I measured. So, that means that what is the correct way of measuring trade data? You have to convert whatever trade data that you get from customs records into trade value added basis. So, when you measure it in terms of trade in value added, then whatever that US is importing from China, you would be distributing that value across different countries. So, how much of that should be attributed to Japanese value added, how much of that should be attributed to Taiwanese or Thailand's or other countries value added. So, you are distributing, then you get the correct picture, and people have now started doing this, right. Yes, yes. So, we will come to that, from where you will get that data and how to construct it. So, that is what the first part of the discussion that we will do. So, we need to construct it that way, and that gives a more accurate picture of the relationship among countries and what is exactly the trade deficit with individual partner countries and so on. So, if you do it that way, and people have done it, and I will show you all these estimates, then the actual trade deficit with that US is running with China is much less, right. It is significantly reduced when you measure it this way. Now, that means that the domestic value added is what really matters for employment, because when a country is exporting good, if the export is happening because of this is important. Not only what I said just now is that means measuring trade in value added is important not only to understand what is the real trade imbalance or trade deficit, it is also important because if you want to know what is the how many jobs are created in a country when it is participating in trade, you need to understand what is the domestic value added from trade, right. Like for example, when India, if you look at Indian trade export data, which are the major items that India export, the first one is petroleum products, second one is gems and jewelry, right, then some engineering products and so on. So, the first two items are petroleum and gems and jewelry. Now, petroleum, how does India export petroleum? We do not have a petroleum even for domestic consumption, but we are the major exporter of petroleum. Now, this happens because Reliance is importing crude petroleum from other countries, they do refinery and then refined petroleum is getting exported. So, that is the value addition that they do, the refining is value addition that they do. So, when this happens, if you look at the Reliance website, they will say that we are contributing to 25% of India's total export. What they do not mention is that they are contributing to 24.5% of India's import. That they will not mention, because why should they mention that? You report whatever that is convenient to you, right? So, if we measure trade in value added terms, then they cannot mention that. They cannot mention that we are contributing to 25% of our export. They can only say that we are contributing to only 0.5% of India's domestic value added. Now, that shows why it is important to say domestic value added. Similarly, gems and jewelry. Gems and jewelry, what is domestic value added? Will be higher than that of petroleum, but still it is not as much as what is being recorded on the basis of gross trade terms. That means if gems and jewelry also contributes to some 15% of Indian export, but if you measure value added terms, it is much less. Yeah. DVA. Yeah, is that conclusion, right? Because if you say that China is running huge trade deficit with the United States, and when Trump is saying that, he has to use some data to suggest that yes, there is a huge trade deficit, this many $1 billion of trade deficit is there for United States. Now, what is the data that he uses to say that? He uses this data, it's a standard data, it is a trade data. Trade data is collected by, how does the trade data come about? It comes from, it is a result of the administrative activity that the customs officials do at the port, right? When goods go out of a country or comes into the country, it has to be recorded, like this much value of particular goods are exported from India to some country. So, the final destination it will mention which is the good which is exported, it will mention what is the value of that good, all that is mentioned, right. That is the way trade data comes in all countries, that is how it comes. Now, there is a major problem with that data. What is the problem? The problem is because you think your mobile phone that you are holding, which country make this mobile phone? Most of the time when you get it is China, made in China, right? It is made in China. Not just a mobile phone, almost everything is China. That is what it is written when you buy this particular good. Now, if you look at clearly, how is it possible for one country to make almost everything? It is not actually possible. Now, what is going on? See, iPhone, if you are buying one iPhone, it may cost, say, let us say some $100. Now, $100 iPhone, when you pay to buy an iPhone, how much of that $100 is actually going to China? It is very, very small. It is only $3 that is going to China. The remaining $97 does not go to China, even though it is written made in China, right. There is data to show that. I will show the data. How much actually China is getting when it is actually making a good. It is getting a very small fraction of whatever is being made in China. It is not getting the anything that is being made in China. Now, why that is happening? That is because of global value chain or global production networks or global value chain. You call it different names: fragmentation trade, vertical specialization, global value chains, global production networks, various names are there. So, what is happening is that there are in order to make a particular commodity, you need various parts, components, various intermediate goods, different types of services. So, goods are made in different stages, they are not done all together, right. So, when they are done in various stages and various components are involved, parts and components are involved, each country tend to specialize in particular stage of the production process. Why that is so? Because each country has a specific advantage. It has a advantage in producing certain things, right. A particular country cannot produce everything, because they are not good at producing everything which is involved in the production of a particular good. So, the forces of specialization operates. So, what each country does is that what it is good at doing, right. So, United States is good at doing research and development. Why it is good at doing research and development? Because it has excellent skilled labor, right. It has the best laboratories, it has skilled labor, they also get human capital from other countries, right, though because so the best engineers, best from different countries, they all go to United States, so they attract them. So they have the skilled labor, they have good laboratories, they have all the supporting environment, so they do R&D, they do design, they do what we call the high value added segment of the production activities, the high value added segment. So there they specialize. So the design and the R&D, marketing, all these are the stages where value addition is the greatest, and that is where the rich countries specialize. And then they find that it makes sense for the companies to outsource certain other activities which is mostly labor intensive to countries like China, because their wages are low, workers are more. So it makes sense to outsource those to them rather than employing the workers in United States, because if they employ workers in United States, they have to pay more wages. So it is advantageous for those companies to do this in other countries, so they outsource. That is why China specialize in assembly activities, so they do assembly. So when they specialize in assembly activities, these parts and components which they use in producing an iPhone, they come from various countries. It does not come only from United States, it comes also from Japan, it comes from Taiwan, Korea, and many other countries are involved in the production of the final good. Now it is not in the case of just iPhone or iPad or aircraft or electronic goods, it is there in most several goods. You cannot think about any good which is only made in only one country. There are very exceptions, except in agriculture products. Most of the manufactured products are produced in different countries. The production processes are happening in different countries. Now Bangladesh is a exporter of garment, but Bangladesh does not have cotton. So where do they get cotton? They get cotton from India and Pakistan. They import it and then they export produce garments, and then big multinational companies based in Europe and US, they subcontract to the manufacturers in Bangladesh to produce things according to their specifications, and then they brand it and then sell it in the world market. That is how. So this is the value chain, right? Now you will be surprised that you know Barbie doll, that that a girl, small little girls, they play with Barbie doll. So if you look at how a Barbie doll is made, people have studied about it, and they have found that there are 16 countries involved in making Barbie doll. The basic design happens in United States, the clothes are procured from Thailand, and the stitching happens in China, and its shoes comes from Sweden or Switzerland, its hair comes from some other European country. So it's like all spread out, it's not happening in one country. So this is what is the importance of global value chain. So it's happening everywhere, not just in few commodities. Now the problem with this is that if you collect trade data when this is happening, then what happens? So when China is exporting iPad from US, from China to US or to any other countries, the Chinese customs officials will record the value of whatever good that is going. It will not record what is the domestic value addition. It is recording what is the total value of good that is going from China. The country which is importing is also recording the total value of the good that is coming to that country. Now this is completely misleading, right? Because the same thing is recorded multiple times in different countries when the same good is going, one country to another country, then a third country. So Japan is sending an intermediate good to Korea first. So at that time Japan customs recording that transaction, the value of that transaction shows that this much of good has gone to Korea. Then Korea is giving some value addition to that particular intermediate good and sending it to Taiwan. Then again the same good is again recorded, the value of the same good is again recorded. It is not recording the value added, it is recording the entire value of what is going from one country. So finally it is going to China, again it is recorded, and then China is sending it to United States, it is again recorded. So that means how many times it is recorded, the same thing is recorded, and we strictly avoid double counting when we measure value added. When we measure GDP of a country, it is measured on the basis of value added. We don't want to measure the same thing multiple times, right. That is basically the idea of how you correctly measure GDP, but this is not happening in trade data. Now, the reason why it is not happening is because it is a byproduct of an administrative activity that the customs doing, and they don't have the mandate to do that. So, yeah.
That way the final producer will always have the highest value.
That is exactly the point. So then the country which is doing the assembly will always have the highest value of whatever is being reported, right. So then what will happen is that the actual trade deficit with China is exaggerated, right, and almost every country will have trade deficit with China. Why? Because China is the assembly center. So since it's an assembly, it's like a local shop buys things from various other people and then sell it with a margin on the goods that they buy. Obviously, when he sell it, what he sell will be at a higher price than what he buys, because otherwise he cannot operate, right, because that is the kind of business he is doing. So his value of what he is selling will be always higher than the value of what he is buying. That is what China is doing. That means the trade deficit, most countries will run a trade deficit with China, and that is quite natural to expect, and it is not a big deal to kind of say that you are running so much a trade deficit with China, because that is what they do. They also import a lot. If you rank countries on the basis of which are the countries in the world which are the exporters, China will come top. China will also come top if you rank countries in terms of major importers in the world. It is not just export side, it is in both sides. So that is one problem. The other problem why these trade deficit figures are not actually correct is because United States is importing good from China, but this good actually came from a major part of that value addition would have come from Japan or South Korea or from Taiwan, but you are attributing that deficit to China. You are not attributing that deficit to those countries, right, because that is a destination from which it immediately came. The original source of the value added in that particular good is other country. So in order to correctly estimate what is the trade deficit, you have to estimate this trade deficit on the basis of trade in value added, not in trade in gross terms, because if you measure it in terms of trade in gross terms, then you will not get the correct picture, because this double counting and multiple counting that I measured. So that means that what is the correct way of measuring trade data? You have to convert whatever trade data that you get from customs records into trade value added basis. So when you measure it in terms of trade in value added, then whatever that US is importing from China, you would be distributing that value across different countries. So how much of that should be attributed to Japanese value added, how much of that should be attributed to Taiwanese or Thailand's or other countries value added. So you are distributing, then you get the correct picture, and people have now started doing this, right. Yes, yes. So we will come to that, from where you will get that data and how to construct it. So that is what is the first part of the discussion that we will do. So we need to construct it that way, and that gives a more accurate picture of the relationship among countries and what is exactly the trade deficit with individual partner countries and so on. So if you do it that way, and people have done it, and I will show you all these estimates, then the actual trade deficit with that US is running with China is much less, right. It is significantly reduced when you measure it this way. Now that means that the domestic value added is what really matters for employment, because when a country is exporting good, if the export is happening because of this is important. Not only what I said just now is that means measuring trade in value added is important not only to understand what is the real trade imbalance or trade deficit, it is also important because if you want to know what is the how many jobs are created in a country when it is participating in trade, you need to understand what is the domestic value added from trade, right. Like for example, when India, if you look at Indian trade export data, which are the major items that India export, the first one is petroleum products, second one is gems and jewelry, right, then some engineering products and so on. So, the first two items are petroleum and gems and jewelry. Now, petroleum, how does India export petroleum? We do not have a petroleum even for domestic consumption, but we are the major exporter of petroleum. Now, this happens because Reliance is importing crude petroleum from other countries, they do refinery and then refined petroleum is getting exported. So, that is the value addition that they do, the refining value addition that they do. So, when this happens, if you look at the Reliance website, they will say that we are contributing to 25% of India's total export. What they do not mention is that they are contributing to 24.5% of India's import. That they will not mention, because why should they mention that? You report whatever that is convenient to you, right. So, if we measure trade in value added terms, then they cannot mention that. They cannot mention that we are contributing to 25% of our export. They can only say that we are contributing to only 0.5% of India's domestic value added. Now, that shows why it is important to say domestic value added. Similarly, gems and jewelry. Gems and jewelry, what is domestic value added, will be higher than that of petroleum, but still it is not as much as what is being recorded on the basis of gross trade terms. That means, gems and jewelry also contributes to some 15% of Indian export, but if you measure value added terms, it is much less. Yeah. DVA. Yeah, this is the GVA which can be attributed to export, which is attributed to export. So, when a country is exporting, we wanted to know how much of domestic value addition is happening from that export, right. That means, basically we want to net out the foreign value addition. Foreign value addition happens when a country is exporting, there is a foreign value addition happening. When India is exporting $100 million of oil, only 10 million is the domestic value addition. The remaining 90 million is the addition that happened in other countries from where Reliance has imported crude oil, right. So, now for oil and gems and jewelry, it is very simple, because you have to, what is import, what is export, and then you find the difference, that will be mostly the value added. But for other commodities, it is not simple, because when you are exporting an electronic products like a television set, then these parts and components which are involved in the production of a television set would have come from multiple sources, right. Some of them domestic, a lot of them imported. So, we wanted to know which are the various things which are involved in the production of a particular good and from where those things came from. So, then only we will be able to estimate the correct domestic value added. Then that means, basically we have to look at the entire inter-industry linkages to find out precisely what is domestic value added. Like, for example, when India is exporting automobile, cars uses iron and steel, it uses leather, it uses plastics, all kind of intermediate goods it uses, tire and all that. Now, where are these commodities come from? Not all of them come domestically, a lot of that is imported. So, we want to know which part of that is imported. The final value of the car which is exported embody all these intermediate goods which is used in that car. Some part of that is imported, some part of that is domestically procured. So, we wanted to separate imported intermediate goods from domestically procured intermediate goods to correctly estimate the domestic value added of export. So, then once we estimate it, it will be very useful, because ultimately for questions like whether exports are important for job creation, we have to link export to domestic value added, not export to gross exports as reported in official statistics, because it is domestic value addition which leads to job creation. So, then we have to link these domestic value addition to job creation. That is a way to understand the role of trade. Now, this is an example of this global value chain, right. This is a sophisticated product, technologically sophisticated product, how Boeing aircraft is made. So, you see that different parts are coming from various countries, right, which is finally comes out as a final good. Various components are coming from different parts of the world. Similarly, this is how the value of iPad, Apple iPad is distributed. You know, when the particular iPad is given iPad is sold, so what proportion of that came from different countries of the total value added. So, if an iPad costs $140, 60% of that came from United States itself. Why? Because United States concentrate in higher value added segment of the iPad production, which includes its basic design, the R&D, all that, the marketing, all that. That is where the wage payments are the highest, right? The R&D, the engineers get the highest wage, or the researchers get the highest pay. The people who are in the marketing there or advertising, these kind of activities, they get the highest wage. So, a significant part of that goes to the United States. China gets only 3%, and then you blame China for everything, right? So that shows the futility of this trade war, right? So, they get only 3% of what you are buying, and then you say that you are responsible for all the problems, right. So, similarly, this is the case of iPhone production, same thing. China is making iPhone, but it is getting only 1.8% of value added. The remaining proportion of value added is going to other countries. Again, US is getting close to 60% of the total value addition, and there are many other countries which are not even being identified here in this process. They are also getting, right. Now, the important question, policy question, particularly from the context of India, can export be used as a instrument for job creation in this context, right. So, if we ask this question, then how do you go about it? Because we know that we have export data, we can run time series models linking whether job creation and exports are related. That is a completely useless exercise. Why? Because first of all, export is not value added, is not the same as value added. It is the value added that creates jobs, not the total gross exports. That is one thing. The other thing is that there are all kind of linkages in the economy. So, if there are export happening from one sector, jobs are created not only in that sector, it is also created in other sectors which are linked to this sector because of the inter-industry linkages. So, time series model does not capture those inter-industry linkages. So, we will not be able to estimate this correctly using traditional type of methods. So, what we need to do, because the question as such is very, very important, because India, the job problem is the biggest problem, and we have the initiatives like Make in India initiative, which tries to create jobs through manufacturing exports, by inviting foreign direct investments, etc. Now, in this context, can export be used as a viable mechanism for achieving jobs is the important question, but it is a complicated question because it is not a very straightforward answer, right. More export does not automatically means more jobs, right, because the link is complicated because of the global value chain, because when you are exporting, there is no guarantee that jobs are all correspondingly created here. Jobs would be created in country when you are exporting. Not all jobs are created here, but it can be created in other countries. Why it is created in other countries? Because we are importing from them. So, jobs are created there. So, that means that we need global input output tables, not just one country's input output table. We need to know how each industry in India is linked with industries in all other countries of the world, right. How much of imports are coming in each sector, right, from all other countries, to understand clearly how jobs are created and the complex interrelationship among countries. This all happens because of the that intermediate inputs cross borders several times and all that. Okay, so another important question which is a policy question in the context of India is that which is very important in this context, because if you go and ask recommend the policy makers, the ministers or joint secretaries in the relevant department, saying that we want to create jobs. So, let us now integrate with the global value chain, so that we can create jobs. They will not listen to you. Why they do not listen to you? Because they think that if you are integrated with the global value chains, then we are creating linkages with other countries. So, the jobs are created there, not here. So, more integration means less domestic job. So, it is always better to kind of create domestic linkages. So, we wanted to erect trade barriers, right. So, some of the recent initiatives by the government that they have created trade barriers for some of the intermediate goods, even intermediate goods, with the idea that this will help make in India. What is the make in India argument? It is like that if you protect our domestic industries, then our domestic industries will buy intermediate goods from here. So, that creates, so we are creating domestic linkages that leads to more jobs here. That is the argument, right. Now, the question is, what should be the appropriate strategy for job creation in this context? Should these kind of domestic linkages should be promoted, right. So, that basically means we wanted to buy all intermediate goods domestically, not from other countries, not to import them, buy it domestically. That is one strategy. The other strategy is integrate with the global value chain. So, now if you are integrating with the global value chain, you cannot say that I will buy only from India. You should be buying from wherever it is cheaper, right. So, these are two alternatives which are available. Which one should one choose? That is the important policy question. And what we are going to show here is to give some evidence which suggests that integrating in global value chain is the correct strategy, because it is going to lead to higher job creation than domestic linkages alone, right. If you go against it, if you do not want to integrate with the global value chains, if you buy goods domestically, obviously you will create some jobs, but what we are going to show that the jobs that you are going to create is much more if you integrate with the global value chains. So, we will use some econometric method to show that. So, this is one important thing that we do, but before going to that econometric question, like which of these strategy is good, we first want to know how to estimate this domestic value added, right. We mentioned that this can be estimated and should be estimated, and how to estimate that, because if you want to answer the other question like which strategy is the appropriate strategy, we need to first estimate what is the domestic value added from export. Now, as I said earlier, the correct method for estimating that requires input output table. You know input output table, it summarizes the relationship among different sectors. So, a sector, a given industry, like for example, automobile industry is given industry. Now, automobile industry, when it is producing automobile, it buys input from other sectors, from other industries. It buys input from rubber industry, it buys input from leather industry, plastics industry, iron and steel industry, and several others, right. Now, it does not end there. Now, automobile industry buys input from iron and steel industry, but the iron and steel industry itself also buys input from mining industry, right. And so, it is linked several times, not just in one round, several rounds of those linkages, right. Automobile buys tire from a tire manufacturing company, but the tire manufacturing company buys natural rubber from farmers. So, the linkages are going from automobile to farming, right. So, that is what input output table captures. So, we need to capture not just this immediate linkage, but also all kind of several rounds of indirect linkages, backward linkages. This is what is called backward linkage. So, automobile has backward linkage with agriculture, right. You know how the backward linkage operates, and we need to capture that to understand what is the total domestic value addition that happens in the economy when India export automobiles. So, we also need to know what is the domestic value addition happens in the automobile industry, plus how much of that happens in iron and steel, in rubber, in tire manufacturing, in farming. All that need to be captured together to understand what is the total domestic value addition. So, which we can obviously decompose into two parts. What is direct DVA, domestic value addition, what is the indirect DVA. Indirect is can be attributed to backward linkages. Okay. So, direct is what is happening in that industry itself, like when automobile is exported, there is domestic value addition happens in automobile. The people who are employed in automobile get wages, because exporting, export means more number of workers are employed, right. So, both the capital owners and the factors of production, that means labor, capital, all get more because of the more new export that happens. So, that is a domestic value added that happens in automobile. Forward linkage will come. So, backward linkage means that when automobile is exported, so let us say last year we exported some 10,000 units of cars. This year we are exporting 15,000 units of, so 5,000 extra. So, 5,000 extra car means more workers or more wages, right, for that extra workers. Similarly, capital owners also get more. So, that is the domestic value added, that is going to automobile, direct domestic value added, that is going to automobile itself. But when these 5,000 extra cars are produced, they are buying extra units of iron and steel, they are buying extra number of tires, which is they are buying from another company. So, that means domestic value addition is created there also, in other companies also, and then iron and steel is buying from mining industry. So, it is creating there also. So, it is several rounds. So, we have to capture these entire linkages, not just one or two. So, the other part is called indirect. The sum total of the linkages in the economy is called indirect through automobile sectors, backward linkages with other sectors. Now, there are two approaches here. One is based on forward linkage and the other one is based on backward linkage. What I just explained is the backward linkage. We will come to this later. So, based on backward linkages, how do you estimate it? This is the standard input output methodology, the old Leontief framework. So, what we have here is that the domestic value, there are two approaches here, DVA 1 and DVA 2. So, let us talk about the DVA 1. So, the total domestic value addition, it is total, that means direct plus indirect, can be estimated as this way. So, there is a small v here, small v, and there is a term within bracket, right, and then there is a capital X hat. So, I will explain what each one of those means. So, this small v means basically it is a vector, all these are vectors and matrices, right, because it is the input output table. Input output table by definition is a matrix, right. So, generally it is a n into n matrix, n number of rows and n number of columns, both rows and columns are equal, right. Is a that is what the input output table is, and we are using that information which is available in input output table to get this number. So, where V is the vector of value added to output ratio. So, for each sector we know what is the total value added, gross value added in that sector, divided by what is its total output. Now, these two concepts are different. Value added is not the same thing as output, because value added is what is going to factors of production, labor, capital, etc. That is what value added. Output is value added plus what the sector is paying to other sectors as intermediate goods. When they are buying intermediate goods from other sectors, what is the value of those intermediate goods? So, output also includes intermediate payment for intermediate goods. So, what we are measuring there is value added to output ratio. So, if a sector is paying a lot to other sectors because of intermediate goods, then the value added will be lower than output, right, because it pays it is paying to other sectors to buy intermediate goods. So, that ratio will be different for different sectors depending upon to what extent a particular sector is dependent on other sectors for its final production. Yeah. Output is the value of the product, but the final value of the product included two components. Yeah, that included two components. One is what is the different factors of production is getting, the factors of production employed in that particular sector is getting, like labor and the capital, how much profit the entrepreneur is making plus how much wages he is paying to the workers. So, that is value added. Now, but then there is another component, which is the what is the value that the particular industry has paid or a firm has paid when it bought inputs from other country, from other industries. So, this is the value of input. So, when you add value of intermediate with added, you will get the total value of the final good which is sold of output. Okay. So, what we have here is this ratio, value added to output ratio is the small v. Now, what here we have is a matrix, that x hat is matrix. That matrix shows what is the total export from gross export, what is the customs people are reporting, right. The customs people the export statistics which is available to all of us. So, what is that export from different sectors? So, if there are 100 sectors, what is that export from all those 100 sectors? So, that is this x hat. So, it is a n into n diagonal matrix, that means that it has n rows and n columns, and it is a diagonal matrix in the sense that if you think matrix, then it has n rows, n columns and n rows. So, only the diagonal values are the export from a given sector, the off diagonal values are all 0. So, you have all the 0 values in the off diagonal elements, and the diagonal elements are the export from sector 1, sector 2, sector 3 and sector n, right. So, that is the way that matrix is defined, and then what we have in the middle is I minus AD inverse, which is what is called the Leontief inverse. So, what it does is that when an export is happening from a given sector, export is happening from a given sector, that sector has linkages with all other sectors, several rounds of linkages with several other sectors, the backward linkage. So, it is picking up all that linkages, that I minus AD inverse is picking up all linkages with I will explain what is A means, what is AD actually means. AD is the domestic technical coefficient matrix, right. What is technical coefficient matrix? It is basically in the input output language, it basically means, suppose that you are exporting 1 unit of automobile, how many units of iron and steel is required when you want to export 1 unit of automobile, how many units of domestic iron and steel is required, that is why D. That is why there is a D, D stands for domestic. So, when you are exporting 1 unit of automobile, how many units of domestic iron and steel is required, that is what AD means, that is the meaning of AD. I there is an identity matrix, right, identity matrix. So, AD captures that technical coefficient, which is the domestic technical coefficient, how many units of different inputs are required when an industry is exporting 1 unit of its output, that is what it is capturing, and we are capturing the inverse of that. That gives the, basically we can show that mathematically, which we are not doing now, but you can go back and see it, how it is capturing the linkages, but it is the standard thing which has been used for years, even in India's planning period and all that, this kind of model is used to capture linkages with other sectors. So, I minus AD inverse is capturing the entire inter-industry linkages in the economy, and through those linkages, and so now if you think about it, forget about this part, the linkage part, right, the middle part. So, if you take only these two, then what does that mean? That means that suppose that in automobile India is exporting 100 million worth of automobile. So, export you will get 100 million, that statistics available given to us by customs. So, 100 million automobile is exported. Now, there is a V, V is the domestic the gross value added divided by value of output. The value of output in the automobile sector, let us say 1000 million crore, $1000 million. Export is $100 million. The domestic output, which includes that 100, is 1000. So, domestic value added is say $700 million, right. So, value added is $700 million, that means basically 300 million is the of intermediate inputs, right. 700 is the what is going to labor and capital. I am just simplifying. So, you will get 7 divided by 10, right, as V. So, 0.7. So, 0.7 multiplied by 100, 0.7 multiplied by 100 is 70. So, that basically means that when you are exporting 100 million worth of automobile, the domestic value addition is 70. The remaining 30 is not accounted by the domestic, it is foreign, right. So, basically that is the way, but that is the direct calculation. You also need to calculate the linkages. The automobile, when the automobile industry is exporting 100 million, it had created linkages with iron and steel, mining, agriculture, tire industry and so on. So, we need to calculate that also, that is why we have that middle term, right. So, no, that is not captured there, because when automobile is industry is giving you statistics, it will not give you statistics about what is the domestic value addition happened in iron and steel industry, right. It does not give you that information, it only gives you that we have used this much of iron and steel, that is included in that 100 or in that 1000, that how much of iron and steel is used is included in that 300 is part of that iron and steel, right. So, that information they give, how much they have used when they produced. They do not give you information what happened to the iron and steel factory, the value addition there. That information we want to capture. So, that is what, because they are selling some 100 million of iron and steel to automobile company. When they are selling it, there is also a V, there is also a small v in iron and steel company, that also need to be calculated. So, how much value addition happens in the iron and steel company, that is what it does, right. So, it captures the full thing. Now this domestic value added can be decomposed into two parts, one is the direct value added and the other one is what is attributed to backward linkage. So, this can be separated into two parts. Now, how do you separate it? It is very straightforward. So, what we do here is that in the this thing I minus AD inverse, if you take it as a diagonal matrix, the I minus AD, if you take it as a diagonal matrix means only the diagonal elements are positive, off diagonal elements are 0. That means we are not looking at the other sectors, the linkages with other sector, we are only looking at the direct what is happening in the particular sector. So, that gives us the direct value added in the automobile industry. Now, if you once you get to the direct, then if you subtract that direct from the total, what remains is the linkage, right. You first get the total, then you get the direct, then you subtract the direct from the total, then what you get is the linkage. So, that we can attribute as backward linkage, right. So, that way we can decompose the total domestic value addition into two parts. Now, this can also be done based on a different concept, which is the forward linkage. Now, forward linkage, the automobile industry which I said earlier is like how automobile industry is linked backward with other sectors which is supplying input to automobile. Now, forward linkage means, now forget about automobile, think about iron and steel industry. Now, iron and steel industry has a forward linkage with automobile, it also has a forward linkage with the construction. It has also forward linkage with the machine tool industry. So, it has forward linkages with many sectors. So, some of those sectors with which it will have forward linkages, they are exporting sectors. Like automobile is an exporting sector, machine tool is an exporting sector, but construction is not an exporting sector, right, but still it has forward linkage. So, we can calculate how much of domestic value addition happened in iron and steel industry because of its own export, direct export, because iron and steel may export directly to other countries, iron and steel, not indirectly through forward linkage, it may also export directly. So, there is a direct component there, then there is also indirect component through forward linkages with all other sectors for which iron and steel is supplying its input. So, that is basically the concept of forward linkage, and that is also relevant. Now, even if a sector does not export at all, suppose that iron and steel does not export, even then it may depend upon export. Why it is depend on export? Because it is supplying inputs to other sectors which are exporting. Right now, if iron and steel is not exporting, but automobile is exporting, and iron and steel is supplying inputs to automobile, so iron and steel depend upon export, right. So, that is what the second measure is doing. Now, this is very similar to this, the only difference is that instead of capital X here, we have just replaced here. This is a diagonal matrix of capital V, here it is a vector, this is a matrix, this matrix becomes a vector here. So, it is a slight change, but what you get is completely different. One is capturing forward linkage, the other one is capturing backward linkage. So, same way, now this is about domestic value addition, same way you can also estimate employment, how many employments jobs are created through backward and forward linkage, basically same approach. The only difference here is that instead of small v that we used there, now we have a small l. Now, what is small l? Small l is employment divided by output for different sectors. So, that will give you, when there is 100 million worth of automobile export is happening, how many jobs are created, right, because the employment divided by output shows that number. So, we have to get the employment divided by output to get this, and again here you can measure it forward backward linkage concept, you can decompose into direct and indirect for both, and so you get both the numbers. I am not spending more time on that, but basically now how do you get the data for doing all that, right. These are the method. How do you get the data? You need input output table for India to get all these, to compute the Leontief inverse. We need value added data, we need output data, we need employment data. All this should be in a consistent format, right. They should be matching each other, they should not be unrelated. So, all these are the requirements. Now, for India, I have done this exercise, and if you are interested, I have given the reference in the end, I will give you the reference. So, this is also available as an Exim Bank of India paper, it is an occasional paper, you can download it. The entire exercise is discussed in detail there. So, what we have done is that for India, the input output table, the government stopped publishing for some time. The latest input output table is available for 2007-8, right. Earlier they used to publish it every 5 years, once in every 5 years, because input output table is an important policy, is an important tool for policy makers, especially during the planning period, because they want to allocate resources for different sectors, and they made that decision on the basis of input output table, the linkage of one sector with all other sectors, all these things. So, the Mahalanobis model, for example, is an input output table model, right. So, but now they are not publishing this. So, what we have done is that we have used whatever is available from the government, the latest being 2007-8, before that it is 2003, then 1998, once in 5 years. So, we used all that, and then there are gaps in between for those years for which input output table are not available. So, what we have done is that for those years where it is not available, we have estimated our own input output table. How we did it? Basically, the idea is that you go back to the entire statistics at the most micro level, right? When the CSO is calculating input output table, they are using that data, right, from the micro unit level. So, for manufacturing sector, the unit level data is the plant level data from the annual survey of industries for the formal sector. For the informal sector, they have the unorganized sector surveys, right. For services and agriculture sector, you have national account statistics. So, from all these you will get to the basic data on value added, data on output, all that. Then NSSO gives you data on employment. Now, unit level data from NSS gives you data at the 5 digit. Now, automobile industry buys input from iron and steel industry, but the iron and steel industry itself also buys input from mining industry, right. And so, it's linked several times, not just in one round, several rounds of those linkages, right. Automobile buys tire from a tire manufacturing company, but the tire manufacturing company buys natural rubber from farmers. So, the linkages are going from automobile to farming, right. So, that is what input output table captures. So, we need to capture not just this immediate linkage, but also all kind of several rounds of indirect linkages, backward linkages. This is what is called backward linkage. So, automobile has backward linkage with agriculture, right. You know how the backward linkage operates, and we need to capture that to understand what is the total domestic value addition that happens in the economy when India export automobiles. So, we also need to know what is the domestic value addition happens in the automobile industry, plus how much of that happens in iron and steel, in rubber, in tire manufacturing, in farming. All that need to be captured together to understand what is the total domestic value addition. So, which we can obviously decompose into two parts. What is direct DVA, domestic value addition, what is the indirect DVA. Indirect is can be attributed to backward linkages. Okay. So, direct is what is happening in that industry itself, like when automobile is exported, there is domestic value addition happens in automobile. The people who are employed in automobile get wages, because exporting means more number of workers are employed, right. So, both the capital owners and the factors of production, that means labor, capital, all get more because of the more new export that happens. So, that is a domestic value added that happens in automobile. Forward linkage will come. So, backward linkage means that when automobile is exported, so let us say last year we exported some 10,000 units of cars. This year we are exporting 15,000 units of, so 5,000 extra. So, 5,000 extra car means more workers or more wages, right, for that extra workers. Similarly, capital owners also get more. So, that is the domestic value added, that is going to automobile, direct domestic value added, that is going to automobile itself. But when these 5,000 extra cars are produced, they are buying extra units of iron and steel, they are buying extra number of tires, which is they are buying from another company. So, that means domestic value addition is created there also, in other companies also, and then iron and steel is buying from mining industry. So, it is creating there also. So, it is several rounds. So, we have to capture these entire linkages, not just one or two. So, the other part is called indirect. The sum total of the linkages in the economy is called indirect through automobile sectors, backward linkages with other sectors. Now, there are two approaches here. One is based on forward linkage and the other one is based on backward linkage. What I just explained is the backward linkage. We will come to this later. So, based on backward linkages, how do you estimate it? This is the standard input output methodology, the old Leontief framework. So, what we have here is that the domestic value, there are two approaches here, DVA 1 and DVA 2. So, let us talk about the DVA 1. So, the total domestic value addition, it is total, that means direct plus indirect, can be estimated as this way. So, there is a small v here, small v, and there is a term within bracket, right, and then there is a capital X hat So, I will explain what each one of those means. So, this small v means basically it is a vector, all these are vectors and matrices, right, because it is the input output table by definition is a matrix, right. So, generally it is a n into n matrix, n number of rows and n number of columns, both rows and columns are equal, right. Is a that is what the input output table is, and we are using that information which is available in input output table to get this number. So, where V is the vector of value added to output ratio. So, for each sector we know what is the total value added, gross value added in that sector, divided by what is its total output. Now, these two concepts are different. Value added is not the same thing as output, because value added is what is going to factors of production, labor, capital, etc. That is what value added. Output is value added plus what the sector is paying to other sectors as intermediate goods. When they are buying intermediate goods from other sectors, what is the value of those intermediate goods. So, output also includes intermediate payment for intermediate goods. So, what we are measuring there is value added to output ratio. So, if a sector is paying a lot to other sectors because of intermediate goods, then the value added will be lower than output, right, because it is paying to other sectors to buy intermediate goods. So, that ratio will be different for different sectors depending upon to what extent a particular sector is dependent on other sectors for its final production. Yeah. Output is the value of the product, but the final value of the product included two components. Yeah, that included two components. One is what is the different factors of production is getting, the factors of production employed in that particular sector is getting, like labor and the capital, how much profit the entrepreneur is making plus how much wages he is paying to the workers. So, that is value added. Now, but then there is another component which is the what is the value that the particular industry has paid or a firm has paid when it bought inputs from other industries. So, this is the value of input. So, when you add value of intermediate with added, you will get the total value of the final good which is sold of output. Okay. So, what we have here is this ratio, value added to output ratio is the small v. Now, what here we have is a matrix, that x hat is matrix. That matrix shows what is the total export from gross export, what is the customs people are reporting, right. The customs people the export statistics which is available to all of us. So, what is that export from different sectors? So, if there are 100 sectors, what is that export from all those 100 sectors? So, that is this x hat. So, it is a n into n diagonal matrix, that means that it has n rows and n columns, and it is a diagonal matrix in the sense that if you think matrix, then it has n rows, n columns and n rows. So, only the diagonal values are the export from a given sector, the off diagonal values are all 0. So, you have all the 0 values in the off diagonal elements, and the diagonal elements are the export from sector 1, sector 2, sector 3 and sector n, right. So, that is the way that matrix is defined, and then what we have in the middle is I minus AD inverse, which is what is called the Leontief inverse. So, what it does is that when an export is happening from a given sector, export is happening from a given sector, that sector has linkages with all other sectors, several rounds of linkages with several other sectors, the backward linkage. So, it is picking up all that linkages, that I minus AD inverse is picking up all linkages with the, I will explain what is A means, what is AD actually means. AD is the domestic technical coefficient matrix, right. What is technical coefficient matrix? It is basically in the input output language, it basically means suppose that you are exporting 1 unit of automobile, how many units of iron and steel is required when you want to export 1 unit of automobile? How many units of domestic iron and steel is required? That is why D. That is why there is a D. D stands for domestic. So, when you are exporting 1 unit of automobile, how many units of domestic iron and steel is required? That is what AD means. That is the meaning of AD. I there is an identity matrix, right? Identity matrix. So, so AD captures that technical coefficient, which is the domestic technical coefficient. How many units of different inputs are required when an industry is exporting 1 unit of its output? That is what it is capturing, and we are capturing the inverse of that. That gives the, basically we can show that mathematically, which we are not doing now. But you can go back and see it, how it is capturing the linkages, but it is the standard thing which has been used for years, even in India's planning period and all that. This kind of model is used to capture linkages with other sectors. So, I minus AD inverse is capturing the entire inter-industry linkages in the economy, and through those linkages, and so now if you think about it, forget about this part, the linkage part, right, the middle part. So, if you take only these two, then what does that mean? That means that suppose that in automobile India is exporting 100 million worth of automobile. So, export you will get 100 million, that is, that statistics available given to us by customs. So, 100 million automobile is exported. Now, there is a V. V is the domestic, the gross value added divided by value of output. The value of output in the automobile sector, let us say 1000 of the 2 margins in other countries like China, which experienced fast growth. Okay, so we will come to some methodological how we can estimate it. Now we want to decompose export growth along the 2 margins. These are some simple indices. It may look very complicated, but it is very simple. So, what it is showing is that this is proposed by these 2 authors in a paper. I have given the reference at the end. So, what it is doing is that the export penetration of any country I, export market penetration of any country I, relative to rest of the world. So, India relative to the rest of the world, or China relative to the rest of the world. So, I stands for either India or China in our analysis. Rest of the world means all other countries except this particular country. So, that can be written as SIT. SIT is the share of India relative to the export of the rest of the world. So, this is export by India, this is export by the rest of the world, aggregate, these are aggregate. Now, this aggregate can be written as the sum of all the disaggregated ones. Right? The disaggregated ones can be observed at the 6-digit level of commodity classification. That means each and every product we can identify and then sum it all, then you will get to the total export. Now, you have a large number of products which you are exporting, and you are also exporting those products to large number of countries. So, you can do this double aggregation, double sum. One is the sum across product, the other is sum across markets. That is why you have a double sum there, right. The double summation here, this is all the market J's, how much we are exporting to different J's. J's are all partner countries. These the P's are all the products, right. You can there are thousands of products which we are estimating. So, P stands for all the products. So, XIJTP stands for the export of product P from country I to market J in time T, right. So, XIJTP you can sum it across countries and across products, then you will get to this total export. So, this total export is the sum total of everything that we do across products and across markets. Similarly, the same thing here, the sum total of export by the rest of the world. Now, this is a set of products, this P stands for the set of products in which India is exporting, that N is the number of products, the set of products that India is exporting. This is a set of products that the rest of the world is exporting, right. Now, what we are going to do is we are decomposing this export share into two margins, intensive margin and extensive margin. Now, how do we do that? We do that using this method. What we have here is that, so this SIT is the share of India in the rest of the world, right, and it is decomposed into two, which is done this way. So, basically the idea of this, the intuition behind that method is very simple. I will explain the intuition. So, what basically here what we are doing is that this is the export, aggregate Indian export from I to in time t, divided by the ratio here now is in terms of the rest of the world's export, but rest of the world's export of only not the entire rest of the world export, but only a subset of the rest of the world's export. What is that subset defined? How is that subset defined? That subset is defined in terms of what are the products and markets where India is having a presence. So, let us say that India is out of the 5,000 products which are there in the globe, we are exporting 2,000 products. Out of 5,000 we are only exporting 2,000, remaining 3,000 we are not exporting, but the rest of the world would be exporting. So, but we do not count that 3,000, we only count the 2,000 where India has a presence, right. Similarly, out of the 200 countries which are there in the world, we are exporting 150 countries, other 50 countries we are not exporting. So, we will count the rest of the world's export only in 2,000 products and 150 countries where India has a presence. So, that is the denominator. So, basically what it is saying is that for those markets and products where India has a presence, what is the share of India in total world exports, right, in total world exports. So, that is what this is doing. Now, here what we do, if you look at both represents rest of the world, denominator as well as the numerator represents rest of the world. Now, the denominator here is the aggregate rest of the world export, the second one. This XRT represents the total rest of the world's export. This is a subset of the rest of the world's export. Now, the numerator here is exactly same as the denominator here. What here you have is the same thing as this, right. So, simply in mathematical terms the two things get cancelled, because this one and this one get cancelled, and then what you have is the original, right, from where you started with. So, mathematically it is fine, but this has a meaning. The meaning is that the first component is what is called intensive margin, the second component is what is called extensive margin. And why we call the second component as India's extensive margin? Because the one simple measure of extensive margin is, suppose that we know what are the total number of products India is exporting, how many number of partners India is exporting. So, simply count that. So, out of 5,000 products we are exporting 2,000, out of 200 partners we are exporting to 150.
Lower the second one, higher is our extensive margin.
No, if the ratio, we will come to that. So, let me think about a very simple way of estimating getting an extensive margin measure. So, out of 2,000, out of 5,000 markets, out of 5,000 products and 2,000 markets, the total export relationship can be 5,000 multiplied by 200 is the total export relationship that can be established by any country, right. In the whole world there are 5,000 products, in the whole world there are 200 countries. So, 5,000 multiplied by 200 is the number of total export relationship which is feasible. Now, how many of them India has a presence? So, India has a 2,000 multiplied by 150. So, that value divided by the other value will give a measure of extensive margin. But the problem with that measure is that we are giving equal weights to each and every relationship. Each and every relationship we are giving equal weight, which is not correct, because some of the relationships are very important, more important, right. Why some of the relationships are more important? Because the world market for some of the product and some of the market is very high. So, if we enter into that, that should get a more weight, right. So, we need to get a weighted count, not a symbol count. Now, to get a weighted count, what should be the weight? The best way to weight is weight with the world market for that product, rather than weighting that with Indian market share. So, we want to weight this count using the importance of a particular product in the world trade or the particular market in the world trade. So, that is what exactly we are getting by doing this, because what is this? This is the rest of the world exports. What is the value of the rest of the world exports in that subset where India has a presence? What is the value of export by the rest of the world in that subset of markets and products where India has a presence, divided by total world exports. Now, if India enter into new products, the numerator will increase. If India enter into new products or new markets, the numerator will increase, right. So, that entry will become important if we are entering into some markets where the world share is very important, then the increase will be greater. But if you enter into some markets like we started exporting to Somalia. Somalia is not important for the world, right, but we start entering, but that should not get much importance in our extensive margin, because Somalia is not a big trading country in the market in the world. So, this will do that, right, because Somalia has a very little share in the total world. So, our entry into Somalia does not matter much, but if you are entering into say some big country where we were not entering earlier, that should get more weight. No, see, if you are converting everything into GVA or DVA thing, then that is true, because ideally the data which we need is the DVA data, but if we do not have a DVA type of information available at this level of disaggregation. You do not get a DVA data at the 6-digit level, you get a for whatever that I try to do, the maximum that we can get is 112 sectors. But this data is available for tens of thousands of products, right. So, world trade, not a number of products. So, you have a lot of that information which is available, even though it is suffer from the problem that it is not on value added basis, it is all gross terms. Okay. So, this is a measure of extensive margin, because you can see that when India enter into a new product or a new market, the numerator increases, right. When India is entering into a new product, numerator will increase, because that is the way it is defined. The only thing is that the weight is done based on the world share, not Indian share. That is the only thing which it is doing, and these two things get cancelled out. So, what we get is the SIT. So, that is the way we can estimate intensive and extensive margin. For doing that, we have used 6-digit level data for India and China for a number of years, and we estimated these for India and China, and we get these numbers. So, what it shows is that the first thing is here is the SIT for India, that is for China. SIT means what is India's export divided by rest of the world's export. You can see that that is very small. India's export divided by rest of the world's export is very small. For China, it is very big. It is 25% for the last year. India, it is about 1.6%, very small. Now, what proportion of this is driven by intensive margin and what is driven by extensive margin? Now, this is the extensive margin, this is the intensive margin. If you multiply these two, you will get this, because that is the way we have done the decomposition. If you multiply intensive margin with extensive margin, you will get the SIT on the other hand, because it is decomposed that way. And now, it is more informative to look at this in a graph. It is the same table, but shown in the graph. So, what here we have is the SIT. SIT is market share, simply the market share of India and China. So, if you look at Indian market share, it is slightly it has increased, but very, very small increase compared to what has happened to China. You see, this is what has happened to China. Now, if you do the same graph, similar graph for the two components of SIT, that is the intensive margin and extensive margin, that is what is shown above. Now, you see this is a mirror image of this. What you get here is a mirror image of this. That means, the India-China gap is entirely explained by intensive margin. Mostly, it is explained by intensive margin. The gap between the two countries is not because of extensive margin. In the extensive margin graph, that is the second one, India and China are not that different. The gap is narrow. Even though India is not doing as well as China, but we are very close, right? Whereas intensive margin, we are very different. So, if India is not doing better than China, it is mainly because we are not doing things in larger volume. We are there everywhere very thinly, but we are not doing in a great scale. The scale of operation is very small. So, that is what mainly explains, because these two graphs are very, very similar. Now, what we are going to do is, so India is lagging behind China mainly, yeah. That is mainly because there was a global financial crisis that happened in that time. So, that get reflected somewhere in the data. So, one way that affected global financial crisis has affected India, that is India glut. China is not affected that much. It is a small decline. For if you look at China, still that also declined, but very small. But India, it has a major decline in that 1 year. Yeah, but that is why these are all misunderstanding, like, if you are more integrated, you will be affected more and all that. So, India is less integrated, but we are affected more. It's all like, because it would depend upon which one, maybe it is like, because when you are very thinly present in some market, a small event, I am not saying global financial crisis was a small event, but that event can affect you much more, right, because in any case you are a very small player. So, when something goes wrong in the world market, the impact on you will be much higher. That is what is getting reflected there. But in the case of China, things get cancelled out. If there is a shock, adverse shock in somewhere, there may be a positive shock happening elsewhere or whatever. But still, we don't know exactly like what is driving that. I have not gone into that, but it coincides with the global financial crisis, that 1 year this thing. But in any case, whatever, yeah. We are going to look at that. Trump's favorite story, but it is not true. We are going to show that. It is not China is manipulating its currency, so they are doing very well. They are doing very well because they are part of the global value chain. They are doing assembly. Everybody wants to produce in China. They want to do assembly in China, because that is the way they reduce cost. By doing that, they get a high scale. Their cost of production goes down because the scale of activity is very high. They are producing for the world market. Obviously, the price at which they can sell is lower. That is not dumping. So, because if you are producing something at a lower cost, then saying that this is dumping is not a correct thing to do. So, they are able to sell it at a lower price because they are doing it better. That is it. So, I am not saying that China everything is perfect. If you criticize China for its democratic freedom and everything, I am with you, but not on economics. On economics, it is doing everything right. On politics, it is doing all wrong. Okay. So, India is lagging behind China mainly due to lack of intensification and specialization. India is not far behind China in terms of diversification. So now we can do this disaggregation and this decomposition for at various levels. So what is done now here is at an aggregate level for the all sectors and all industries. You can do that for manufacturing, you can within manufacturing different groups of products, for garments, for technologically sophisticated products, labor intensive products, several things you can do, which is all there in the paper. This paper is already published. You can read the paper, which is available in a journal called World Economy. So it is published in 2018, Journal of World Economy, and you can download the paper and read for more details. So now this is a gravity equation. So we wanted to know what explains this India-China difference gap. One story is the favorite story of many people is exchange rate. China is doing something wrong, right? They are doing something wrong to get such a superior performance. So India is not doing those things wrong. We are everything correct. So that is why we are not able to export. China is manipulating currency, and that is the reason why they are able to export more. That is one story, right? The other story is that it is all driven by multinational companies, right? They got a lot of multinational FDI in China, and they are exporting it. And Indian multinational companies are not engaged in so much in export. They are more engaged in domestic market. They are selling in the domestic market, not so much export. These are the two stories which whenever people want to compare India with China, they say these stories. And then there are other stories which is more.
Another story that I want to know.
Yes.
The wages in China is going up.
Yeah.
So they might lose the competitive advantage.
Yeah. Yeah.
India is not the case with India.
We will come to that, because it's a story about wages, like when things are changing there, whether India can enter into that. So this is not automatic, like just because China wages are going up doesn't guarantee that India will be able to now replace China, unless policies are also changing. To
Other countries in Asia also getting advantage.
yes, other countries are getting advantage. So the big advantage, the one country which got a big advantage because of the increase in wage rates in China is Vietnam. So Vietnam is going to be the next success story in Asia, right? It's a poor country, but it is going big, richer day by day, exactly because of global value chain. They are entering into global value chain in a major way. The areas where China is vacating, Vietnam is entering, and India is not interested in this, because we are more interested in sending Chandrayaan to moon, right? No, because we think that doing assembly activities is below our status, because we are a world leader in technology and all these things. So if you do assembly for other countries, what is that we can claim? So our policy makers have this problem. They think that doing assembly is some kind of cheap activity, because we import from others and then use our cheap labor, export low wage, this kind of mindset that has been there right from the time we got independence, right? Because at that time the difference was what is called the Bombay school and the Delhi school. I am not saying Delhi school of economics, but Delhi school of thought. So the Delhi school of thought wanted big industries, the heavy industries. Bombay school of thought wanted wage goods. They asked these labor intensive goods, because that is where India had a comparative advantage at that time. We had cotton, we had jute, we had garment industries and all this, and we wanted to expand. But Delhi school said no, we are the world leader, we want to become the world leader. So they invested in ambassador, right? They invested in iron and steel and all these kind of industries. So what happened then? What happened to the other industries which were the traditional industries of India? They found that India is not the place to operate, because of this import substitution policy, exchange rate is getting overvalued, because these are export oriented industries, garments and all these are export oriented industries. They find that the exchange rate is becoming very overvalued, and if it is overvalued exchange rate, they become non-competitive in the international market. So what they did, there is a paper that I have written looking at India's outward FDI. If the first phase of this outward FDI happened during the 60s and 70s. You know why it happened? Because these industries which were based in India, particularly in labor intensive industries, they found India to be very, very unattractive for their expansion. Why? Because they cannot export, because exchange rate was very overvalued. Because of the particular policy that they followed, they fled India, they fled out of India. They went and invested in other Asian countries, in Sri Lanka, in Malaysia, all these countries they went and invested. They grew there. So they have gone out of the country, because we do not encourage the industries which we had a comparative advantage, which was labor intensive industries. We tried to promote industries where we didn't have anything, any capabilities, domestic capabilities at that time. Through the planning mechanisms and all that, we try to promote those industries. I will come to that. So that I will come to that. I will come to that. So after that, so we capability these industries which operated under, because there was a trade barrier, these industries could survive, because otherwise if it is a free trade regime, ambassador would not have been there, right? Who will buy ambassador if foreign cheap cars were available which are better quality? Ambassador survived 4 decades because of high trade barrier, right? Because of high trade barrier. After Maruti came through FDI in the 1980s, ambassador disappeared, right? So this is what happened. Now we opened up. Now with the opening up, we would expect that these changes should change now. Now what happened in the opening up, we were very selective. Where we opened up product market, we didn't touch factor market. Now any trade theory, any trade book, basic book if you read, how does a country gain from trade? Country gain from trade because of when a country is protected and now you open up, what happens? There were which were there earlier under protection, that industry should shut down. New industries should emerge, right? Which are the industries which should emerge? The industries where the country has a comparative advantage, which is labor intensive industry in a labor abundant country. So these labor intensive industries like garments etc. should expand in India with opening up. But if you don't allow labor movement from one industry to the other industry because of labor laws, what is the labor law? Labor law says that if there is 100 workers are employed in your factory, you cannot touch them, you cannot retrench those workers, right? This law is still a law. Even now it is not, even though some states have increased that limit to 300, which includes Rajasthan, UP and Maharashtra and few states has increased recently to 300. UP did it long time back, but other states did it recently, but still there is a restriction. In all other states it is a restriction that 100 workers. So then what will the potential entrepreneurs do? They don't want to get into labor intensive industries, because if they get into labor intensive industry, this law kicks in. Now whatever happens to you, there is no way that you can shut down your factory, you cannot retrench workers, because the government never gives that permission to retrench workers. So because of these labor laws, the even if the labor laws is very rigid, still these entrepreneurs are able to hire people. So that is not a solution, because it is true that there are contract labors. You can employ contract labors when there is a restriction on labor laws on hiring permanent workers. But the Yeah, it has gone up, but the problem is that contractualization is not the optimal solution for the firm. Why firms want to go for contract labor? Because they are not able to hire them on a permanent basis. Why they want to hire them on a permanent basis? Because the employer wanted to train them. They wanted a long term, establish a long term relationship with the workers. Now on contract labor, they are not going to invest their training and all this, because the contract labor can go to the next, they can get training from one company and then go and invest in work in somewhere else. We will come to this. So that is another topic which we will come to that. Let us get into this, get back to this. Okay. So what we are going to do is that we are looking at these explanations. What explain India-China gap? Why China is doing better than India? What explains? Whether it's the exchange rate, whether it's something else, right? So what we have here is a gravity equation. So gravity equation, basically the idea is that, first of all, this gravity equation, generally those who wanted to do work, empirical work, are all encouraged to do gravity equation, because you are all interested in getting stars, right, when you run the regressions, and the gravity equation will not cheat you, it gives you a lot of stars. So that is a good attraction about gravity equation. So if you do it correctly without making mistakes, data entry errors, you will get stars, and that is what we wanted in basically when you run regressions. So earlier people have been doing it, but it works very well, like you generally get a very good R square, very good t statistics and everything, and generally it works very well. But the one problem with the gravity specification is that this is basically an idea from physics, that the gravity in physics means that the two bodies with higher mass, if the mass is bigger, they attract more, right. So the mass here in the context of gravity equation is the GDP, is the size of the country, that is the mass. So countries which are bigger in size, they trade more, they attract more. So that is basically one idea. The other one is that the gravity also says that it is inversely proportional to the distance, the geographical distance. So the level of attraction is inversely proportional to the distance and directly proportional to the size or the mass. So when geographical distance is more, they trade less. So basically that is the underlying idea, which is also applied in trade. But for long, this idea people have been using, but it worked well when it is done empirically in econometrics. But the problem is that this gravity model remained as a child without a father, right. So basically it was a orphan. Why? Because it was adopted from physics, right. So so it lacked that credibility, like in economics. So what we were worried, like in people who were working in international trade, because it is always not a good idea to show that this is my model, but it has no theoretical basis, right. We need to have theoretical basis for the specifications. So what is being done is that now there are theory models in international trade itself, from which you can derive gravity specification. So now it has a proper address within economics itself. You cannot say that it is taken, the idea is taken directly from physics. So that is what I wanted to discuss first, but we don't have time there. So I have avoided discussing it, like how you can derive this gravity model from a theoretical model, right. So those who are interested on that can actually read Robert Feenstra. There is a textbook, it is called Advanced International Trade by Robert Feenstra. There is one chapter there on gravity model, where that paper, that chapter discusses the derivation of gravity model from a trade model, from a model related to international trade. How can you derive gravity model? It's there for those who are interested, can read that. So let us now get back to this particular thing. So GDP of country I and country J, because it's a trade relationship between I and J, should be there in the gravity specification, because this represents a mass of the two countries, and then geographical distance should be there between the two countries, and then other variables which can include exchange rate, the bilateral exchange rate between the two countries, then whether the two countries are sharing a common border, what is the language that the countries are speaking, whether they speak a common official language, right, and their common colonial history. So many things can be included, which is specific to country I and country J, the bilateral relationship. So the rationale for including all these variables are available in theory models. We can derive why distance should be there or why GDP should be there. All these can be derived from theory models. We are now taking it as it is and then showing. So here what we have is, we have this export from India to each partner J, the aggregate export from India to each partner J in each year T. We also have extensive margin and intensive margin from India to each partner J and each partner for each year T. So we have that for India as well as for China. This is not at the disaggregated level, this is not at the level of product, it is aggregated at the overall level. So we have that for each partner J and each partner D, each year T for India and China. So we pool, first India and China is pooled, the data is pooled for every year. So we get that information. Then on the left hand side, that is the dependent variable is export, total export from India. I stands for India or China, right? I stands for India or China. J is all countries, all partner countries, and similarly extensive margin and intensive margin. So once you pool it, you have the data for both India and China, the bilateral data, and then we include GDP of J. J means the partner country, right? Of per capita GDP of J, per capita income of the partner countries, that is the income level. One is the size, the other one is the level of income. Then the exchange rate, real exchange rate between I and J, the two countries bilateral exchange rate. Then FDI, foreign direct investment, real effective, real exchange rate, because it is bilateral, it is only with one country. Effective means when you have a basket of currencies, right? Here it is only one country, you are doing exchange rate with one partner. So this is with each individual currency, and FDI from the two countries I to J, right, that one, it is actually J to I, partner to India, right, that way. So RTA means regional trade agreement, whether I and J have signed a regional trade agreement, right, free trade agreements. It's a dummy, it's like in a given year, if there is a free trade agreement with partner J, it will take value 1, otherwise it is 0. Okay. And then you have a DI, DI stands for a dummy for China. So DI take value 1 if the I country is China, otherwise 0, that means India. So this is basically the idea here is to find out whether to what extent China is doing better than India along these 2-3 things, right. And then we have also partner fixed effect, the J fixed effect. There are different J's, so for them all the fixed effects. So that is why we do not include distance there. Geographical distance cannot be included in this specification. Why? Because geographical distance does not change with the time, right. Geographical distance is a constant with respect to J. Border dummy is also constant. Common language, whether the two countries are sharing a common language, is also a constant. These do not change over time, because these are all country dummies, right. So any variable which does not change over time cannot be included when you have a fixed effect, but the fixed effect will capture everything. It is a catch-all measure, which is like does not change, the impact of all the variables which do not change over time is all picked up by the fixed effect. So when you have a fixed effect, you do not need to include the distance, etc. So, that is why the partner fixed effect, and this partner fixed effect is India and China separate. So, India's partner one dummy, China's partner another dummy. So, for each partner we have partner fixed effect. So, that is why the distance type of variable is not included in this specification, but you can also include another specification where this is not there, this partner fixed effect is not there, but you have all other variables like a distance, border dummy, language dummy, etc. That can be run, but this is more robust because this takes care of everything which is specific between I and j, which does not change with the time. Now, there is also year fixed effect, and then we estimate this, and then the important thing to note here is that all these variables they show generally expected signs and all. The important thing to note here is that this di, that to what extent China is doing better than India. So, you see there that this coefficient is positive everywhere and significant, that means China is doing better than India along all these lines, even after controlling for all other things which is included there. And but the difference between India and China is very high in intensive margin than in extensive margin, because this coefficient is lower than that coefficient. So, that we can find, but then to see it further, what we do is now we want to know why that China is doing better than India. We have seen it is confirming that China is doing better than India, which we already know. This is simply confirming that. Now, what is more interesting is to understand what factors explain that superior performance of China compared to India. So, what we do is that we introduce 3 interaction terms. The one is the China dummy interacted with exchange rate, then China dummy interacted with their FDI that they are getting, then another one, China dummy interacted with the per capita income of the partner to which these countries are exporting, the partner countries per capita income. Now, I will explain what is the logic behind doing that, but before that let us look at the result. So, if you look at these 3 interaction terms, all these fixed effects are already included here, and if you look at this interaction term, we see that the exchange rate is not significant. So, China dummy, China doing better than India is not because China has a competitive exchange rate. So, exchange rate story does not stand here, right. So, it is not the exchange rate. FDI, to a certain extent FDI is responsible, but a very small effect, and on intensive margin it has a negative impact, it has only a positive impact on extensive margin, but intensive margin is the main story between India and China. The difference is mainly driven by intensive margin, where FDI is not responsible, exchange rate is not responsible. Then what is responsible? This variable is responsible. You see that this is a big positive coefficient, and mainly on a intensive margin it comes out big, very big. Now, what is the story behind this? We will come to that, and before that let us do another specification. So, let us now exclude other interaction term, include China dummy as well as this interaction term. China interacted with per capita income of the partner countries. So, when you do that interaction term, you see that the China India gap, which is still there, but a very small gap. Earlier it was much higher here. The coefficient for DI earlier, when this was not included, was 2 point something. It is a big gap. When that interaction term was not included, the DI coefficient was 2 point something. Now, the DI coefficient is only 0.315, it is not strongly significant also, it is only significant at a 10% level, and the India China gap completely become even negative when we include this. So, basically what does this mean? This means that once we control for China's trade relationship with the rich countries, per capita income means the richness, the countries, you know, if they are rich they will have higher per capita income, and if we control for China's trade relationship with the rich countries, there is no China India gap, right. China India gap is mainly driven by its high trade orientation in rich country markets, in the advanced country markets. That is where China is doing much better than India. When that is controlled, when that is taken into account separately, we do not see much of a China-India gap. Now, why this happens? Why China is trading with rich countries much more than India is trading with rich country? Simple explanation. Explanation is that one is China is there in the value chain in a major way. They are integrated in the value chain much more than India is. Now, value chain means basically rich countries wanted China to produce their goods there, and then they will buy from China, right, because the rich countries are the bigger market for all goods. They outsource these activities in China and then they buy it from China. So, that is one thing. The other explanation is that China is producing what exactly rich countries wanted to buy. China is producing what poor countries want to buy. The example is that what we are producing, except forget about the services. We are talking about, this is all about merchandise. In merchandise, what we are producing? We are producing, our automobile export has increased quite significantly over the last several years. The automobile, our major exporter of small and compact cars. We export cars, produce cars. Who will buy our cars? It's mostly Africa and other developing countries. Germany will not buy Indian cars, right? US also will not buy a lot of Indian cars. They will buy cars from other countries, other advanced. They will buy German cars. They will not buy Indian cars. Our market is in Africa or in other countries in Asia. Similarly, we are a major exporter of pharmaceutical products. Our pharmaceutical products, we cannot sell a lot of our pharmaceutical products in advanced countries. We can sell them in Africa. Africa is again our major market for pharmaceutical products. Now, basically the idea is that we have entered into more relatively skill intensive and capital intensive products. We have not exploited our comparative advantage in labor intensive products, because labor intensive products is what advanced country wants to buy from developing country, right. If you look at our trade statistics, you will see that if you compare automobile with garments, in garments about 60% of our export goes to Europe and Western Europe and US. About 60% of our garments go to advanced countries. If you look at automobile, only 6% go to advanced countries. Now, if you move away our specialization from, no, I'll come to that. So, what we are saying is that when you move away from our comparative advantage in labor intensive products to other areas where we actually do not have comparative advantage, like a capital intensive and skill intensive products, then what will happen is that our market will also shift, right. That is why India's share, the advanced countries share in India's export has declined very dramatically. It has declined for China also, but not as much as that for India. The share of advanced countries in their export even now remain 50%. For India, it is about 35%. So, advanced countries account for only 35% of India's exports now. For China, it is 50%. So, that has happened mainly because we are not producing goods which they want to buy from us, which includes mostly labor intensive products. Now, the issue about child labor and all that can be solved if we are part of the value chain, because when you have a part of the value chain, what happens is that the big brands will not allow you to use child labor, because it is bad for their publicity. Because if some NGOs come and take a photo of this child labor working and put it in the BBC or any media, it is a bad publicity for them. They will not do that risk. Who uses child labor? Child labor is being used by the local firms. It is a big multinational companies cannot do that risk. It is for them, their brand image is very, very important. if the brand image get affected through adverse publicity, because when you see that when few years back when there is a major fire happened in Bangladesh and some workers have died because of that, many of these that led to huge protest in advanced countries. Why? Because this happened in companies which had subcontracting arrangement with some of the big brands, right. So, that led to big problems with for Bangladesh. So, they cannot take such a risk of employing child labor to produce goods for their brand, and because if they do that, then it will have a bad image for the company, its reputation will get affected. But for other small companies which does not have any reputation anyway, they can always employ child labor because they have nothing to lose. Okay. So, that is not the problem. The problem is that we are not integrated in the value chain. We have not created the enabling conditions for multinational companies to come here and participate in the production process because of certain rigidities which include labor laws among other things. So, that is the major problem. Now, coming back to this labor law issue, some people would say that if you go and survey companies, Indian companies, and ask them the big problems that you are facing in India, right. If you look at Indian companies, if you survey them, they will not say that labor law is a big problem. Then the people who are looking at those results will say that why are you then saying that labor law is a big binding constraint. These companies themselves are saying that they know how to manage labor laws, it is not a big trouble. Now, when you use this result and come to that, you are making a big econometric mistake, error. What is the error that you are committing? This error is called the error of selection bias. Why selection bias? Because you are going and interviewing a company which is already there in the market. The fact that they are there in the market means they are there because they know how to manage it, right. They are there exactly because they know how to manage it, otherwise they would not have been there. So, only those companies who know how to bribe the politicians, manipulate the system, how to bribe the labor union leaders, they will be there. Now, for them, they know that they can handle this, they can handle this somehow, but they cannot handle a problem of electricity. If there is no electricity, they cannot bribe trade union leaders to get more electricity. That is a binding constraint for them. So, they will report obviously that our problem is electricity or connectivity. Labor is not our problem because they know how to manage it. Instead, if you go and ask a big potential entrant who want to enter into India, but it is also true in other industries including garments, there are big brands based in western countries, they want to buy, they want to do business here. So, small companies establish contracting relationship them and then sell the product to them, and they brand it in their name and then sell it in the world market. Okay, I think we will stop it here now.